2 weeks into the 2024 transfer portal cycle, and Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks are killing it. But there's still a couple more needs that need to be addressed before the cycle is over.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. It is December the 18th of 2023, which means we are now officially 2 weeks into the 2024 transfer portal cycle. And so far, Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks have been big winners, securing 9 commitments to this point, including 2 on Sunday. We're going to discuss those commits later on in the show, plus a couple more targets that Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks might want to take a look at a certain position. But before we dive into all of that, let's touch on where things currently stand now that a couple weeks have passed since this transfer portal cycle began. Because there's still a couple of needs that Shane Beamer and this staff can address before things are said and done in this portal cycle. At this current moment, South Carolina, when you include all of their current scholarship players, plus the transfers that they have landed to this point, and all of their high school commits from the 2024 class, South Carolina currently has 84 scholarship players in the fold. Now, the max that you are allowed on your roster is 85 scholarship players. And admittedly, I'm unsure as to whether or not South Carolina could go above that number and then go into spring practice, let's say, at like 87, 88 players, and maybe they just have to get down to 85 by the time fall camp begins this next August. I don't really know what the deadline is. I'm telling you, I tried my best to research it and figure out if there was any sort of rule around that, but I could not find anything despite my best efforts. Also, just to bring this up, South Carolina is currently predicted to land Vanderbilt quarterback transfer A.J. Swan per multiple outlets. So he could immediately fill this last slot pretty much any day now. And so for the sake of this conversation, we're going to go along with the old adage that the numbers always work out in the end. In essence, whether you are above that number or you're a little bit below that number of 85 scholarship players, the coaching staff will find a way. So, assuming that that is the case here, let's talk about some of the remaining needs for South Carolina. Because, again, as I mentioned earlier, they've done a great job to this point of addressing several different position groups. The running back position needed some running backs at the top, some veteran experience and guys that they could really lean on as proven contributors. They got that. They needed to restock the wide receiver room. They have done that for the most part. They needed to get another edge rusher on this defense, somebody to at least push for a starting job. They got that in Kyle Kennard of Georgia Tech a few days ago. But the last 2 needs that I think that South Carolina has got to address before the end of this cycle is, one, they've got to get a starting caliber outside wide receiver and maybe another rotational piece to go along with it. And 2, they need to get a starting caliber outside cornerback for their defense. When looking at the wide receiver position, the reason why I say South Carolina has got to get another starting caliber outside wide receiver is because you look at this roster right now. You've got 4 guys, in my opinion, that are in the fold for next year at this very moment that could give you significant production at this spot. And those four guys that I would throw out there are Jared Brown, the Coastal Carolina transfer, Nicholas Harper, who will be a true sophomore next year, Jaden McCowan, the Vanderbilt transfer, and Mazeo Bennett, who I'm extremely high on as a 2024 commit and eventual signee, likely later this week. They've also got a couple wide receivers that have potential and could potentially take a step forward in 2024. And that group includes Elijah Caldwell, Tyshawn Russell, and Kelton Henderson. And the SEC, in my opinion at least, you want to have six wide receivers that you feel comfortable trotting out there on the football field, without there being too much of a drop-off at that position. The issue with a lot of the guys that I just brought up, it's not necessarily their talent for the majority of these guys, but it's more so the fact that a lot of these guys are slot receivers in terms of their skill set. The only real guys that could play on the outside out of the whole group that I just mentioned are Nicholas Harper and Elijah Caldwell. Harper obviously is still very raw and still needs more time to develop and really mold himself into a true all-around wide receiver. And Elijah Caldwell, he didn't even play a single snap in the regular season in 2023. So that's why, in my opinion, if you're South Carolina, you got to be looking at outside wideouts, and you've got to find someone that is a starting caliber wideout for your SEC football program, someone that is proven, and we're going to talk about a couple of guys in just a minute. But before we do that, let's talk about outside corner real quick. Right now, this is the way that your outside corner position looks. You've got O'Donnell Fortune coming back for next year. You got Judge Collier, Emery Floyd, and Vicari Swain, who've all been in the program for at least a year or two. And then you've got incoming freshmen Jalewis Solomon and Braden Lee. Again, assuming that those guys stick and there's nothing crazy that happens during the early National Signing Day period. When you look at O'Donnell Fortune's career stat line, Fortune has racked up 12 starts to this point in his career. He has racked up also 61 total tackles, 10 pass breakups, and 4 interceptions. The rest of that group that I just mentioned has 14 total tackles. And that is it. So, in the SEC, look, you could definitely try to convince me that, hey, with Judge Collier, Emery Floyd, Swain, Solomon, and Lee, that's a very talented young group, and one of those guys could possibly step up and be that second starting outside corner alongside O'Donnell Fortune next year. You could possibly convince me of that, but I don't think that's a chance that you want to take if you're Shane Beamer and whoever the defensive coordinator is for South Carolina heading into this next season, whether it's Clayton White or it's somebody else, because obviously no coaching moves have even been made yet to this point. So it's just something to keep an eye on throughout the rest of the transfer portal cycle, because obviously, again, running back and wide receiver, those were your two biggest needs in terms of you had to get a bunch of guys there immediately, and you've gotten them. Now it's time to take a closer look at other positions and try to fill in the last couple holes that are remaining, that are glaring right now on your roster if you're Shane Beamer and this staff. Now, again, I mentioned a couple moments ago that we're going to talk about a couple of wide receiver options that are currently in the portal. Guys that, in my opinion, could come to South Carolina and they could make an instant impact as a starter for this team. We'll talk about those guys in a little bit more detail in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers and roof racks to exhaust kits and LED headlights, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million with an M parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to this Monday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first watch on YouTube or your first listen wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Now, in terms of portal wide receiver targets, South Carolina, they have thrown out a bevy of offers to several different guys. A bunch of guys that, unfortunately for the Gamecocks, have already committed to other programs. But that does not mean that there are no longer any viable targets out there on the portal market. There's a couple of guys that South Carolina could target and potentially get if they press hard enough, in my opinion. So let's go over those two wide receiver candidates real quick. Starting off with Wake Forest's Jamal Banks. Now, the first thing I like about Banks is he's got the prototypical size that you want in an outside wide receiver, being listed at 6'4" and 205 pounds according to his Wake Forest bio. He also comes from an area in South Carolina's main recruiting footprint, Washington, D.C. South Carolina, look, when you got a guy that comes from that kind of area that you've had a lot of success in, it might not mean as much as it would if he was a high school recruit, but you could still go and use some of your contacts in the area to get an idea of what kind of kid he is, what kind of player he is on the football field. That kind of stuff can help you throughout the vetting process when you're looking at potential portal targets here. He is also a proven starter at the Power 4 level, and his career stats back up that notion. In 4 years, Jamal Banks has recorded 107 receptions for 1,404 receiving yards, 13.1 yards per catch, and 13 receiving touchdowns. And the majority of those stats really came over the past couple years in the Demon Dinkins offense. Now, I also went and looked at Jamal Banks' Pro Football Focus grades from the 2023 football season. And the Pro Football Focus grades say that this guy is a very solid Power 4 wideout. His offensive grade was 77.6. His receiving grade was 78.5. And his hands grade, or drop grade, as Pro Football Focus likes to call it, was 93.1. Jamal Banks, get this, he did not drop a single pass last season, and he only dropped 2 passes in 2022. He's dropped 2 passes in total over the past 2 years. So clearly, Jamal Banks has got hands. He's got good enough hands to compete at this level. Now, there is one potential concern that I would have about Jamal Banks if South Carolina were to pursue him and he were to in turn commit to the Gamecocks. And that would be the fact that the Demon Dinkins, they run a very unique offense called the slow mesh offense. And basically, what the slow mesh is, think about play action. Play action is where the quarterback acts like he's going to hand off the football to the running back. It's meant to try to sucker in the linebackers and also sometimes the safeties on the back end and try and draw you in enough to where when the quarterback pulls the ball back and he drops back 7-8 steps and, everyone realizes, oh shoot, it's a pass play, it's too late. You've already been suckered in enough to where somebody's already beating you over the top and all the quarterback's got to do is lob the ball over your heads and it's an easy touchdown. The slow mesh offense at Wake Forest is very similar when it comes to the concept. The quarterback basically acts like it's going to be an inside zone handoff with the running back, but the quarterback has the option to pull that ball out and throw the ball over the top. And they've gotten so disciplined with it that, they're able to do this consistently without having, usual procedural penalties like illegal lineman downfield or illegal receiver downfield. Wake Forest runs it quite well. The problem is they're the only team in the country that I know of that runs that offense. And so if Jamal Banks were to come to South Carolina, the question that I would ask would be, how is it going to operate in a more conventional offense, more of a pro-style offense where, again, sure, some things might kind of be similar in terms of the overall goal and objectives, but it's nothing like what he's used to at Wake Forest. So that would be my only question mark that I would have if the Gamecocks were to get Jamal Banks. But I think Jamal Banks is a good receiver, one of the better ones that's still out there in the transfer portal. And I think that South Carolina, quite frankly, should go and take a look at him if they haven't already. Now, the other guy I want to talk about real quick is Tulane's Chris Brazzell II. Now, same deal as Banks. Chris has really good prototypical size. He's 6'5", 195 pounds. So you can definitely put him on the outside. He's also reportedly already been contacted by South Carolina's coaching staff, according to On3's Hayes Fawcett, who posted that on X late Sunday evening. And you look at his 2023 stats, he also has proven himself to a certain degree at a decent level in the group of 5 at Tulane. Because in 2023, Chris caught 44 passes for 711 receiving yards, that's 16.2 yards per catch, and he reached the end zone 5 times in the passing game. Now, looking at his Pro Football Focus grades, they're also pretty decent for the most part, as Brazel had a 76.3 offensive grade, a 77.3 receiving grade, and a 67.7 hands grade. Now, the only potential concern that I have when it comes to Chris Brazel is maybe a bit nitpicky, but Tulane played one Power 4 opponent in 2023, and that was the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, as it turns out, Ole Miss, one of the better football teams in the entire country in 2023. Can't take that away from them. Won 10 games. Finished, I believe, 9th or 10th in the final college football playoff ranking. So Lane Kiffin, that squad, they're one of the best teams in the country this year, and definitely by far the biggest challenge for Tulane this season. But when I went back and looked at Chris Brazel's stats, he didn't do anything against Ole Miss. Matter of fact, he was targeted 4 times, and he didn't record any stats. He didn't catch a pass. I don't even think he had a carry. I don't even think he had a rush, technically, in the box score. So, again, it might sound a bit nitpicky because it's one game. But the thing is, when I look at guys from the group of 5 or the FCS level at these kind of positions, I look at some of those games and I use that as an indicator of, hey, can this guy go to this level and handle the increased competition that he's going to face should he come here? And if we're going to base that just off of his performance against Ole Miss, the answer might be no. He might be a wide receiver 2 caliber player where he's getting you maybe 500 receiving yards. But again, if you're South Carolina, you're not necessarily looking for that. You're looking for a guy that's got the potential to be a number 1 wide receiver. And I know that some of you might sit there and think South Carolina's probably got a guy like that on the roster they can develop. I don't know if I agree with that right now. At least as of this moment, I don't think Nicholas Harbor is ready to be that guy in that receiving core, or anybody else in the receiving core for that matter. So, if you're not going to show up in maybe the biggest game of the year that your team plays, then I'm going to have a concern about whether or not you can handle playing at the SEC week in and week out against 8 conference opponents in one whole year. So, either way you slice it, I think both of these guys, Jamal Banks of Wake Forest and Chris Brazel II of Tulane, I think that they're 2 really good receivers in the transfer portal, and I think that South Carolina, again, if they're looking for another guy from the portal right now, they should look at both of these guys as 2 viable options. And apparently they're already looking at Chris Brazel. So throw in Jamal Banks as well, and you got options in terms of trying to fill out these final couple of slots on your roster. Now again, South Carolina, they've already been rolling in the transfer portal cycle over the past couple of weeks, and they capped off this weekend with even more good news as they landed 2 more commits, one on the offensive side of the ball and another on the defensive side of the ball. We'll talk about both of those guys in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. South Carolina got 2 more guys that are likely going to be contributors for them at their respective positions in 2024. Ball State tight end Brady Hunt and Tennessee Tech defensive back Gerald Kilgore. Those were the 2 commits that the Gamecocks got on Sunday. So let's dive into what both of these guys could offer. Starting off with Ball State tight end Brady Hunt. Now, Brady Hunt, he did not play at all in 2023. Reason being, from what I can tell, I believe he suffered a foot injury. I guess it may have required an operation that basically just took him out for the entire year. But when Brady Hunt was healthy and playing in 2022, he was one of the best young tight ends in the entire country. As a matter of fact, he was named a freshman All-American by a couple different outlets in 2022. And in that 2022 season, Brady Hunt caught 46 passes for 498 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. So the numbers speak to Brady Hunt's ability and skill set, but what about what the game footage showed? Well, I watched a couple of games of Brady Hunt's from 2022, and the thing that I mainly noticed is that Brady Hunt does seem to be a bit more of a receiving tight end when it comes to what he offers from a skill set standpoint. He is very fluid in his route running. He is not a guy that takes, 3-4 seconds to get in and out of a break in a route. He's a guy that basically keeps his feet moving at all times, which is good for somebody that just a couple years ago was playing quarterback. And by the way, because he played quarterback, he has great hand-eye coordination. He is not a guy that struggles when it comes to catching the football consistently. If he doesn't have somebody getting ready to lay a lick on him, he's going to have that football in his hands and he's going to secure it, and he is likely not going to drop it. That is at least what I saw from the game highlights that I watched. Now, Brady Hunt, he is also a guy that is willing to block for you. He is a guy that will line up in line with the offensive line, so essentially right next to the offensive tackle, and he will help you out in the run game. I will say, I don't think it's exactly a weakness, but I also don't think it's a strength of his. I'd say he's probably somewhere in the middle when it comes to his proficiency in blocking. I would say this, I would never send him to the opposite side of the formation on a kick-out block or a pull block. If you do that, I think that there's a greater likelihood that a play could get blown up. At least that's just from the few plays that I saw in 2022. Who knows? Brady Hunt could be way better at that at this point because it has been a couple years since he has played legitimate live football on the field. But all in all, I think that Brady Hunt is a good get. I think he's a great get considering the situation in the tight end room. You got Joshua Simon coming back for one last ride. He is going to be your starter. So, you had to have a sidekick right behind him. I'm not sure what it is with Nick Elksnis. It does not seem like the staff is all in on him because, I saw Connor Cox, a true freshman, getting snaps in front of Nick Elksnis on offense late in the 2023 season. But at the same time, who knows? They might not feel like Connor Cox is ready yet. And Michael Smith, the talented tight end out of Savannah that they've got coming into this class, again, as long as he signs, while he might have a ton of talent, I don't think they want to throw him out there immediately. I think that the way this staff is operating right now is, again, they're trying to be a bit more proactive in terms of depth situations, in terms of, what could possibly happen. And so you get a guy like Brady Hunt who has college experience right behind Joshua Simon. It allows these younger guys a little bit more time to develop and get their feet under them if they're just enrolling. It's a very smart move. It's a very savvy move by Shane Beamer and the staff that is going to go unnoticed in the SEC. But I think it's one that's going to pay dividends for them when the 2024 season rolls around. Now, switching things over to Gerald Kilgore, the defensive back from Tennessee Tech. Yes, he is the older brother of Jalon Kilgore. And I have to admit, when I first saw the news that Gerald Kilgore had gotten an offer, I didn't quite know what to think. At first, I thought that admittedly it was a bit of a family offer in the sense that they love Jalon Kilgore, obviously, on this football team. He was a freshman All-American in 2023, and maybe they were doing this to try to make him happy. Or I shouldn't say make him happy because that would insinuate that he wasn't happy. I would say keep him happy by offering his older brother. That's the point I was trying to get at there. But I would have looked at some of the numbers, and I have to say, Gerald Kilgore, I take back that initial thought. It seems like that the older Kilgore, he is a guy, he could possibly play at this level and be a really valuable contributor. His Pro Football Focus grades in 338 total snaps for Tennessee Tech in 2023 were really solid. Kilgore had an 85.4 defensive grade, an 83.9 rush defense grade, a 72.5 tackling grade, and an 83.1 coverage grade. So Kilgore, much like his younger brother Jalon, it seems like that while he is maybe a bit more of a run stopper when it comes to his strengths, he's a guy that can also sit back in coverage. He seems like a guy that basically is going to slide right on in at the safety position for the Gamecocks. So if you do that with Gerald Kilgore, that safety position, I tell you what, with the amount of talent that they've got at that spot, I'm getting closer and closer to the point where I'm just ready to say, if you're South Carolina, again, no matter what the coaching situation is on that side of the ball in 2024, I think you need to just go ahead, bite the bullet, switch to the 3-3-5 permanently, at least for the next couple years. Because if you're going to live by the philosophy, lean on the strengths of your defense in this case. Your strength right now, although you've got a couple solid players everywhere, your strength is your safety position. And in a 3-3-5, you can create a defensive scheme where you have 3 safeties on the field practically at all times. And yes, that would mean you're giving up a little bit in terms of numbers in the box or numbers around the line of scrimmage, which means at times you might give up chunks of yards in the run game. But I think with the guys that South Carolina's got back there and the guys that continue to add like a Gerald Kilgore, y'all, they probably will go too deep, at least, at that safety spot in a 3-3-5 right now. So, again, it's another move where, look, did South Carolina have to get another safety on this team? They probably didn't, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Again, if you're going to move to that 3-3-5, it makes sense to get another safety. Gerald Kilgore, he's got college experience. He happens to be the older brother of one of your star defenders on this team. And based on the stats and based on the analytics, he's a really solid football player. And I get it. Coming from Tennessee Tech, that's not going to be music to your ears necessarily. But one of the things that Shane Beamer and his staff have excelled at to this point when it's come to the transfer portal is finding diamonds in the rough at lower levels, particularly the FCS and sometimes, yes, the Division II ranks. Could Gerald Kilgore be the next Gamecock in line when it comes to continuing that trend? We'll, of course, find out over the next couple of years as Gerald Kilgore takes the field. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. 2 weeks into the transfer portal cycle, what are y'all's thoughts on what the Gamecocks' current needs are now with all the guys that they have landed over the past couple of weeks? Also, what are your thoughts on Ball State tight end Brady Hunt and Tennessee Tech defensive back Gerald Kilgore and what they could bring to this team? And lastly, at the wide receiver position, who do you think the Gamecocks should target if you think they still need some more wide receivers? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you could shoot me a direct message on X at @aline_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all once again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Monday and a fantastic start to the work week. I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.